Back in the late 1880s, the world could feel vast and empty, especially out west. The wind was a constant companion on Jasper Hale's ranch, a mournful sound that seemed to echo the quiet ache inside him. He lived alone in the small, sturdy cabin he'd built with his own hands, the same hands that had buried his wife 2 years prior, then his infant son a year after that. Grief was not a fleeting visitor. It was a resident, settling into the corners of the cabin like dust, heavy and silent. His ranch was little more than a patch of hard earth struggling to support a small herd of cattle, a few scrawny chickens, and a solitary, weary man. He'd come west with dreams the size of the sky, but the prairie had a way of whittling dreams down to the bone. Now his life was a cycle of endless chores, mending fences that the wind or the coyotes seemed determined to tear down, hauling water from the well, tending the stubborn, rocky soil. There was no time for softness, no room for the lingering tenderness he still felt for the ghosts that haunted his memories. He had hardened, not out of choice but necessity, the landscape and loss sculpting him into something as stoic and unyielding as the ancient rocks scattered across the land. Jasper didn't seek company. The nearest town, Redemption, was a day's ride away, a collection of rough-hewn buildings and even rougher people. They were quick to judge, slow to trust, their faces etched with suspicion of outsiders, of anyone who didn't fit their narrow mold. A penniless widower, struggling to keep his head above water, wasn't exactly a welcome addition to their sparse social fabric. He preferred the silence of his ranch, broken only by the wind and the lowing of his cattle, to the whispers and averted gazes of the town. Loneliness was a familiar burden, less painful than the awkward pity or outright scorn he sometimes encountered. He had built walls around himself, thick and high, mortared with sorrow and sealed with resignation. He ate his meager meals alone, watched the sun dip below the horizon painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, and slept in the bed that felt vast and cold, without the warmth of his wife beside him. He was surviving, a quiet, grim existence, waiting for, he wasn't sure what, maybe just the slow passage of time until the ache dulled completely, or the wind finally carried him away. His life was a still pool, stagnant and undisturbed, reflecting only the empty sky. One afternoon in late spring, the sky, usually a brilliant, endless blue, began to bruise. Dark clouds gathered with alarming speed, boiling over the western horizon like an angry sea. The wind, normally a hum, rose to a shriek, whipping dust into stinging cyclones. A storm was coming, a fierce one. Jasper secured what he could, checked on the livestock, and battened down the cabin. He'd seen bad storms before, but there was something in the air this time, a heavy, oppressive stillness before the fury broke, that felt different, menacing. The rain came down in sheets, thick and relentless, turning the dry creek bed that ran near his property into a raging torrent within minutes. Thunder rattled the cabin walls, and lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the churning landscape. He watched from his window, a grim fascination holding him. The creek, usually so docile, was now a muddy brown monster, overflowing its banks, tearing at the earth. Suddenly, a sound pierced through the roar of the storm, something sharp and unnatural above the wind's howl and the thunder's crash, a scream, then another. High-pitched, terrified screams carried on the wind from the direction of the flooded creek. Jasper felt a jolt, a prick of something other than his own persistent ache. Fear. Pure, unadulterated childish fear. He didn't think. He grabbed the length of rope he kept coiled by the door, pulled his hat down low against the driving rain, and plunged out into the tempest. The wind tore at him, the rain blinded him, but the screams pulled him forward. He stumbled through the rising water and mud towards the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm he hadn't felt in years. He reached the creek bank, now a torrent many yards wide, brown water surging past, carrying debris, branches, fence posts, things ripped from the land. And then he saw them. 2 small figures, clinging desperately to a large, uprooted tree trunk being swept along by the current, 2 children. They were soaked, terrified, their faces pale and streaked with mud and tears, their small hands white-knuckled on the rough bark. One had long fair hair plastered to her face, the other dark hair, both wide-eyed with terror. Their screams were thinner now, raw with exhaustion and fear, but still cutting through the storm. There was no time to hesitate. The tree was moving fast, being dragged towards a bend in the creek where the current intensified and led towards a more treacherous section downstream. Jasper ran along the bank, looking for a point where he might intercept them. He spotted a sturdy cottonwood tree, its roots dug deep into the earth. He scrambled to it, tied one end of his rope securely around the trunk, and held the other end, watching the floating tree trunk approach. As it drew level, close enough that he could see the desperate pleading in the children's eyes, he braced himself and hurled the coiled rope towards them. It was a long shot, the wind catching at it, but he threw with all his strength, years of ranch work lending power to his arm. The rope landed across the tree trunk, just within reach of the girl with the fair hair. "Grab it," he yelled, his voice hoarse against the storm's roar. "Grab the rope, hold on." For a heart-stopping moment, she seemed frozen by fear. Then, as the tree began to pick up speed, her small, mud-caked hand reached out, fumbling for the rope. She caught it, her fingers closing around the rough fibers. "Hold on tight," Jasper yelled again, digging his heels into the muddy bank, leaning back against the pull of the current and the weight of the tree. He began to pull, slowly, painstakingly, against the river's fury. His muscles screamed, the rope burned his hands, but he kept pulling, focusing only on the two small, fragile lives clinging to that unstable piece of wood. Inch by painful inch, he guided the tree trunk closer to the bank. The dark-haired girl was whimpering now, burying her face against the fair-haired girl's side. The fair-haired girl, though trembling uncontrollably, held onto the rope with a tenacity that belied her size. When the trunk was close enough, grounded partially by the swirling water against the bank, Jasper dropped the rope end and scrambled down, wading into the icy, churning water. He reached the tree, his legs unsteady in the current. He gripped the fair-haired girl first. "Let go," he said, his voice gentler than he expected, though still rough from shouting. "I've got you." She hesitated for a second, then released the tree, collapsing into his arms, a dead weight of cold and fear. He scooped her up and carefully navigated the churning water back to the bank, laying her gently on the muddy grass. He turned back immediately for the other girl. She was smaller, her eyes wide saucers in her pale face. She didn't need prompting, she reached for him immediately, her small hands clinging to his arm. He lifted her into his arms as well, her body shivering violently against his chest. He carried her back to the bank, his boots sinking into the mire. He stood there for a moment, the two children huddled together on the ground, shivering, sobbing quietly now, the screams spent. The storm was beginning to abate, the thunder rumbling off into the distance, the rain easing into a steady drizzle. He looked at the creek, still swollen but no longer carrying debris, then back at the children. They were just two small souls, lost and rescued. He didn't know who they were, or where they had come from, but they were alive, and they were here. Bringing them back to the cabin was a slow process. The fair-haired girl, who seemed slightly older, could walk, though shakily. The smaller one, the dark-haired girl, was clearly exhausted and needed to be carried. Jasper carried her, wrapped awkwardly in his rain-soaked jacket, while the older girl clung to his free hand, stumbling along beside him. The silence between them was thick with unspoken fear and exhaustion, broken only by the younger girl's soft, intermittent whimpers. Inside the cabin, the air felt blessedly still after the storm, but also heavy with a new kind of tension. Jasper had not shared his space with anyone in years, let alone two strange, wet, frightened children. He busied himself building up the fire, the flames licking greedily at the dry wood, casting flickering light and desperately needed warmth into the room. He found some old blankets, rough wool but clean, and wrapped them around the shivering children, who huddled together in front of the fire, their eyes wide as they watched him. They were silent now, only the occasional tremor passing through their small bodies. He looked at them, really looked at them, and saw not just lost children, but something fragile and precious thrust unexpectedly into his care. He managed to find some dry clothes for them, things left behind from his wife's brief, hopeful preparations for their son, flannel shirts and drawers, much too big, but clean and warm. He helped them change, their movements stiff with cold and shyness. The fair-haired girl had scraped knees and a nasty bruise on her arm, but nothing seemed broken. The younger one seemed physically unharmed, though emotionally fragile. He warmed some water and poured it into tin cups, adding a spoonful of sugar. He offered it to them. The older girl took hers hesitantly, her eyes still fixed on him, assessing. She sipped it slowly. The younger one just stared at the cup until the older one gently took it and held it to her lips. She drank a little. Jasper didn't ask questions. He didn't know what to ask. Where did you come from? How did you get in the creek? Was anyone else with you? The words felt too big, too intrusive, for the fragile space they occupied. He simply sat on a stool a little distance away, watching them, letting the warmth seep back into them, letting them feel safe. He was still soaking wet, but tending to himself felt less urgent. He learned their names slowly over the next few days. The older girl, the fair-haired one, was Abigail. She was maybe 6 or 7, with serious blue eyes that seemed to hold too much understanding for her age. The younger one was Rose, perhaps 4, with dark curls and a round, soft face that was quick to cloud with fear or brighten with a shy smile. Abigail spoke little at first, offering only hesitant answers to his basic questions. No, there was no one else. Yes, they had been walking near the creek. Rose didn't speak at all, clinging to Abigail or hiding behind her skirts, her gaze rarely meeting Jasper's. They were wary, like wild creatures, ready to bolt at the slightest sudden movement or sound. Jasper understood wariness. He lived with it himself. He gave them space. He went about his chores, milking the cow, feeding the chickens, working in the small garden patch. He left the cabin door open, a silent invitation, but he didn't press them to join him. He brought their meals inside, simple fare, eggs, milk, sometimes a piece of jerky or flapjacks, and ate separately, giving them privacy. He saw them watching him through the window sometimes, their small faces pressed against the glass, observing his solitary routine. Gradually, the silence in the cabin began to shift. It was still quiet, but less empty. The rustle of their blankets, the soft sound of their breathing at night, the tentative clink of tin cups at mealtimes. Jasper found himself talking to them, not expecting answers, just filling the quiet with mundane words about the weather, the animals, the tasks he was doing. He talked about his horse, Comanche, a gentle old gelding, and his cow, Bessie, who gave good milk. He saw a flicker of interest in Abigail's eyes when he spoke of the animals. One morning, he was out mending a fence near the cabin when he saw Abigail standing in the doorway, watching him. Rose was peeking out from behind her legs. He didn't call to them, just kept working. After a moment, Abigail stepped out, then Rose, hesitant, clutching Abigail's hand. They stood a little way off, observing. He found himself explaining what he was doing, showing them how the wire needed to be tight, how the post needed to be sturdy. Abigail listened, her expression thoughtful. Rose simply watched, sometimes looking from him to Abigail, as if seeking reassurance. This was the start. Not a grand gesture, but a small shared activity, the rhythm of work creating a bridge across the silence. Slowly, tentatively, they began to follow him sometimes when he went out for chores. They didn't help at first, just trailed along, small shadows in his wake. He showed them how to gather eggs from the nesting boxes, how to feed the chickens, how to scatter grain for the birds. Rose giggled for the first time he'd heard, a sweet, unexpected sound, when a brave hen pecked gently at her small fingers. He learned that Abigail was fiercely protective of Rose, always holding her hand, speaking for her when she dared to speak at all. He saw the deep bond between them, forged perhaps by whatever hardship they had faced before the river. He also saw their fear, still present beneath the surface, a flinch at a loud noise, a sudden tightening when a stranger, even him sometimes, moved too quickly. It spoke of something more than just being lost. One evening as he was reading by the fire, a worn copy of Shakespeare, something he clung to from his former life, Abigail crept closer, drawn by the light. She watched him for a long time, then softly asked, "What are the words?" He hesitated, then began to read aloud, his voice a low rumble. He read from The Tempest, words of storms and islands and spirits. Abigail listened, rapt. Rose, curled in a blanket, seemed soothed by the rhythm of his voice, and drifted to sleep. When he finished, Abigail was silent for a moment, then asked, "Did the storm take them to a safe place?" Jasper closed the book, looking at the small, serious face. "Sometimes," he said, choosing his words carefully, "storms take you where you need to go, even if you don't know it yet. It felt like he was speaking about himself as much as the characters, or even them. He started teaching Abigail letters, scratching them in the dirt with a stick, showing her how to sound them out. She was a quick study, eager to learn. Rose would watch, sometimes copying the shapes in the dirt with her own finger. These quiet moments of shared learning, shared tasks, shared presence, began to chip away at the walls around Jasper's heart. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was caring for something, responsible for something beyond his own bleak existence. He began to feel a flicker of something that wasn't grief or loneliness, a nascent sense of purpose, a fragile thread of connection. He started thinking about their future. He couldn't keep them forever, strangers that they were. Someone must be looking for them. He would have to take them to redemption, report them, let the authorities handle it. The thought brought a familiar tightening in his chest. Taking them to town felt like giving them up, like returning them to whatever unknown circumstances had led them to the river. He delayed, finding excuses. The roads were still muddy from the storm. The creek was still too high to cross easily downstream. In truth, he dreaded the moment he would have to hand them over, dreaded the return to his solitary silence. Then, the outside world came looking for them. A rider arrived one dusty afternoon, not from town, but from the east. He was well-dressed, too well-dressed for ranch country, astride a fine horse, his face set in an expression of impatient determination. He spotted the children playing near the cabin, Rose chasing chickens, Abigail watching her with a small smile, and reined in his horse sharply. He dismounted, his boots clicking on the packed earth, and approached Jasper, who had emerged from the barn. His gaze swept over Jasper, the worn clothes, the rough hands, the simple cabin, with thinly veiled disdain. "Hale?" the man asked, his voice crisp and educated, lacking the lazy drawl common to the area. "Jasper Hale?" "That's me," Jasper replied, his hand instinctively going to the axe handle he'd been holding. Something about this man felt like a threat. "I am Arthur Prescott," the man stated, pulling a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "These children, are they here, Abigail and Rose?" Jasper's blood ran cold. He looked at the children, who had frozen at the sight of the stranger, Abigail pulling Rose close. "They are," Jasper said, his voice low. "Thank God," Arthur Prescott said, though his tone held no discernible relief, only efficiency. "My sister, Martha Prescott, has been distraught. We have been searching for weeks. They were lost when a carriage accident near the river. Well, never mind the details. They are under my sister's care, and mine by extension, as their uncle. I've been sent to retrieve them." He looked past Jasper towards the children. "Abigail, Rose, come along now, your Uncle Arthur is here." The children didn't move. Abigail's eyes were wide with apprehension, and Rose pressed herself against her sister's legs, burying her face. They didn't look relieved, they looked terrified. Arthur Prescott frowned, impatient. "Come now, don't be difficult." He started to step past Jasper, towards them. Jasper moved, blocking his path. "They were in the river," he said, his voice flat. "Caught in the flood." Arthur Prescott paused, glancing back at the creek, then shrugging slightly. "Yes, a terrible storm. Fortunate you found them. Their nursemaid was inadequate, careless. She didn't survive, I'm told." He dismissed the loss with a wave of his hand. "But they are well, healthy?" "They are," Jasper confirmed, his gaze steady. He looked at the expensive fabric of Arthur Prescott's suit, the polished boots, the air of entitlement. He looked at his own worn clothes, his calloused hands, the dust on his boots. The chasm between them was vast, representing worlds apart. And these children, who had found a fragile peace and laughter on his humble ranch, belonged, legally at least, to that other world. Arthur Prescott noticed Jasper's resistance, the quiet challenge in his stance. His expression hardened. "Look, Hale, we appreciate you finding them. There will, of course, be a reward. But my sister is eager to have her children back. They belong with their family. They are Prescotts, you understand. My sister's late husband was, well, the Prescott name carries weight. Especially with the railroad. We have means, resources, a proper home." He looked around Jasper's ranch, his disdain no longer veiled. "Not this." The implication hung heavy in the air. Jasper Hale, the penniless rancher, was no fit guardian for children of railroad royalty. His cabin, his life, were inadequate. The walls Jasper had painstakingly begun to dismantle around his heart felt suddenly vulnerable, exposed to this man's cold judgment. "They were half drowned when I pulled them from the creek," Jasper said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They were alone, scared. They have been safe here, cared for." "And we are grateful," Arthur Prescott said, his tone condescending. "But gratitude has its limits. Their place is with their mother, in New York, in a situation commensurate with their station. Pack their things, whatever they have. I wish to leave by morning." "They don't have any things," Jasper said. "Just the clothes my wife made for the child we lost." The words were out before he could stop them, raw and personal, thrown into the face of this man's detached efficiency. Arthur Prescott paused, a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps discomfort, quickly masked, crossing his face. "Unfortunate," he said, his voice clipped. "But irrelevant. The children are coming with me." "No," Abigail said, her small voice surprisingly firm, stepping forward from behind Rose. "We don't want to go." Arthur Prescott sighed, as if dealing with petulant servants. "Abigail, darling, you don't understand. This man has been very kind, but your mother is waiting. A grand house, your toys, your own rooms." "We want to stay here," Abigail interrupted, her blue eyes fixed on her uncle, a stubborn set to her jaw that Jasper recognized from himself. "With Mr. Hale." She used the full word, as Jasper had taught her. Arthur Prescott's face darkened. He looked at Jasper, his eyes narrowing. "What have you been telling them, Hale? Filling their heads with nonsense, keeping them here against their will?" "I haven't told them anything, except what you saw," Jasper said, standing taller. "They are afraid of you. They feel safe here." "Safe?" Arthur scoffed, looking around the dusty yard, the simple cabin. "Safe in this hovel, with a man of your condition? My sister will hear of this, your interference. You cannot possibly believe you have any claim to these children. They are Prescott's. They belong with the Prescott family." "They are just children," Jasper said, his voice gaining strength, fueled by a quiet anger he hadn't felt in years, an anger that burned hotter than his old grief. "They needed help. I helped them. They are not property to be claimed." "They are my sister's children," Arthur stated coldly, "and she has the means to provide for them properly. Your help is appreciated, but it ends now. I will return in the morning. Have them ready." He turned and strode back to his horse, mounting with an air of finality. Jasper watched him ride away, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He looked down at Abigail and Rose, who had come to stand beside him, small hands gripping his trousers. They looked up at him, their faces pale with apprehension. "We don't want to go, Mr. Hale," Abigail whispered, her lower lip trembling. Jasper knelt down, bringing himself to their level. The scent of dust and wildflowers clung to them. He looked into their eyes, saw the trust that had slowly replaced the fear. He had saved them from the river, but now he felt he had to save them from something else entirely. A world of cold expectation and entitlement that saw them as possessions rather than people. "You are safe," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are safe here." He didn't know how he would manage it, facing down a man with money and influence, a man who clearly saw him as nothing. But looking at these two small faces, he knew he couldn't let them go. His quiet, isolated life was over. The storm had indeed taken him somewhere new, and he would have to fight to stay there. The next morning the air was thick with anticipation. Jasper had slept little, turning over Arthur Prescott's words, weighing his options. He had none, really. He was a poor rancher with no legal standing. Arthur Prescott could easily take the children, perhaps even accuse him of kidnapping. But the thought of those two small, vulnerable beings being dragged back to a life that made them look so afraid, a life overseen by a man like Arthur Prescott, was unbearable. He felt a fierce protectiveness rise up in him, stronger than any emotion he had felt since losing his family. He would not let them go without a fight. Arthur Prescott arrived promptly, not alone this time. He was accompanied by the local sheriff, a burly man named Brody, who looked uncomfortable caught between the well-dressed gentleman and the quiet, determined rancher. Arthur Prescott seemed confident, almost smug. "Hale," Arthur said, his voice sharp, "are the children ready?" Jasper stood in the cabin doorway, Abigail and Rose clinging to his legs, peeking out from behind him. They were dressed in the oversized, clean clothes, their faces pale but resolute. "They are here," Jasper said, his gaze fixed on Arthur Prescott. "But they don't want to go with you." "That is not for them to decide," Arthur scoffed. He turned to Sheriff Brody. "Sheriff, these are my sister Martha Prescott's children, lost during a recent accident. This man rescued them, for which we are grateful. But he seems to believe he has some right to keep them. I'm here to claim them on behalf of their mother." Sheriff Brody shifted his weight, tugging at the brim of his hat. He looked from Arthur Prescott to Jasper, then his gaze softened slightly as he saw the children. He knew Jasper Hale, or knew of him, a quiet, hard-working man, kept to himself since his wife died, never caused trouble. This Prescott fellow, on the other hand, smelled of money and trouble. "Mr. Prescott," Sheriff Brody said, his tone cautious, "the law says children belong with their parents or legal guardians. If this gentleman is indeed their uncle, representing their mother—" "I have papers," Arthur interrupted, producing a document with a flourish. "Authorization from my sister, Mrs. Pline, Martha Prescott, granting me temporary guardianship for their retrieval and transport." Sheriff Brody took the paper, examining it slowly. Jasper felt a cold dread creeping up his spine. It seemed Arthur Prescott had anticipated resistance and come prepared with the force of law, or at least the appearance of it. "And you say their mother, Mrs. Martha Prescott, is— well, who is she?" Sheriff Brody asked, scratching his chin. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but maybe just because the gentleman put such emphasis on it. Arthur Prescott drew himself up, puffing out his chest. "Martha Prescott is the widow of Senior Thomas Prescott, of the Trans-Continental Railroad, one of the founding partners. Her family is, well, let's just say they are a family of considerable standing and means. These children are accustomed to a life far removed from this." He gestured towards the ranch with a sweep of his hand, encompassing Jasper, the cabin, the dusty yard, with utter contempt. The name hit Jasper like a physical blow. Thomas Prescott, the railroad man. He'd heard the name, seen it in newspapers that occasionally made their way west. Railroad royalty. The wealth and power that name represented were immense, incomprehensible from Jasper's perspective. These children, Abigail and Rose, who had shared his simple meals and helped gather eggs, were heirs to a fortune, part of a world he could only imagine. The contrast between their origins and their current circumstances, clinging to a penniless widower in a remote cabin, was stark, almost absurd. Sheriff Brody's eyes widened slightly at the mention of Thomas Prescott. The name carried weight even out here. His tone became more deferential towards Arthur Prescott. "Ah, yes, the Prescotts. Well, Mr. Prescott, the law seems clear. These children belong with their mother." He looked apologetically at Jasper. "Mr. Hale, I appreciate what you did, truly, saving them from the river. That was a brave thing, but you can see, this is their family." "Their family abandoned them," Jasper said, his voice firm despite the trembling in his hands. "Left them with a careless nursemaid who couldn't keep them safe. They were alone, lost, and terrified. They found safety here. They found comfort. And they don't want to go with him." He met Sheriff Brody's gaze, then Arthur Prescott's. "What kind of home are they going back to if they are afraid of their own uncle, if they beg to stay with a stranger?" "Children are often frightened after an ordeal," Arthur Prescott said, waving a dismissive hand. "They are confused. They need to be returned to their proper environment, their routine, away from disruptions." He eyed Jasper with suspicion. "Unless you've been deliberately turning them against me, against their mother." "I've done nothing but care for them," Jasper retorted, a spark of anger igniting in his eyes. "Treated them with kindness, something it seems they haven't had enough of." "See here, Hale," Arthur Prescott's voice rose, losing its cool veneer. "You're overstepping. I can make things very difficult for you. I can claim you abducted them. That you are holding them for ransom. People like me, we have the means to ensure our interests are protected, and my interest is getting these children back to their mother immediately." The threat hung in the air, heavy and real. Jasper knew Arthur Prescott could easily make good on it. A man like him, with the power and influence of the Prescott name behind him, could crush Jasper Hale without a second thought. He looked at Abigail and Rose, their small faces etched with fear, their hands clutching his worn trousers, as if he were their only anchor in the world. The thought of them being wrenched away, taken back to that cold, entitled world represented by Arthur Prescott, filled him with a desperate resolve. "They are not ready to go," Jasper said, ignoring the threat, his voice quiet but unyielding. "They are still recovering, from the river, from being lost." "That's nonsense," Arthur Prescott exploded. "They are perfectly healthy. Look at them, a bit dirty perhaps, but unharmed. This is a delaying tactic. Sheriff, I demand you compel this man to release the children, now." Sheriff Brody hesitated. He was a man of the law, but he was also a man who knew the value of a good name and a powerful family. Yet, he saw the genuine fear in the children's eyes, the way they clung to Jasper Hale. And he saw something in Jasper's gaze, something fierce and protective, that didn't fit the picture Arthur Prescott was painting. "Mr. Prescott," the sheriff said slowly, "perhaps we should wait, let the children calm down. We can talk to them, see what they—" "No," Arthur barked. "We will not wait. I am leaving with these children today. They are Prescott's. Do you understand the name, the power behind it? I will not have my time wasted by a penniless rancher and a hesitant lawman." Just as the tension reached its peak, a new sound cut through the heated exchange. The sound of an approaching buggy, coming fast down the rough track towards the ranch. All eyes turned as a vehicle, finer than any seen in this part of the country, pulled to a halt near the cabin. A woman, elegantly dressed despite the dusty journey, descended from the buggy, her face pale and drawn with anxiety. She was beautiful, with eyes the same striking blue as Abigail's, though etched with worry lines. She looked nothing like the picture of distant, uncaring royalty Jasper might have imagined. She looked like a mother, desperate with fear. "Arthur," she cried, her voice trembling, "you found them." Arthur Prescott visibly straightened, regaining his composure. "Martha, yes, I found them. They are here, unharmed, though this man," he gestured dismissively at Jasper, "has been proving rather difficult." The woman, Martha Prescott, didn't fully listen to her brother. Her eyes were fixed on Abigail and Rose, who had stiffened at her appearance but now, seeing her face, let go of Jasper and ran towards her, crying out, "Mama!" Martha Prescott dropped to her knees in the dirt, gathering her daughters into her arms, holding them tightly, tears streaming down her face. She murmured their names, stroking their hair, checking them over with frantic eyes. It was a raw, undeniable display of maternal love, shattering the image Arthur Prescott had presented. Jasper watched, a strange mix of relief and sorrow washing over him. Relief that the children's mother was not a cold, distant figure. Sorrow at the realization that this was the end. Their true family had come. After several minutes, Martha finally released her daughters, holding their hands and looking at them, truly seeing them. Her gaze fell on their clothes, the familiar too-big flannel shirts. She looked up at Jasper, her eyes questioning. "Mr. Hale, I presume?" she asked, her voice soft but clear. "Arthur sent word ahead that a rancher had found them. I came as quickly as I could. Thank you for saving them, for keeping them safe." Her gratitude felt genuine, heartfelt. "They needed help, ma'am," Jasper said, feeling suddenly awkward under her intense gaze. "He is refusing to let them go, Martha," Arthur Prescott interjected, his tone aggrieved. "Claiming some sort of bond. He is clearly not suitable." "Be quiet, Arthur," Martha said, her tone sharp, silencing her brother. She looked from Jasper to the children, then back to Jasper. She saw the way Abigail and Rose were looking at him, not with fear, but with a quiet affection, a sense of belonging. She saw the worn lines on Jasper's face, the tired eyes, but also the kindness there, the quiet strength. She saw the hand he still held, the one the children had clung to, the hand of a man who had pulled them from a raging river. "Abigail," Martha said, turning to her older daughter. "Rose, darling ones, are you ready to come home?" Abigail looked from her mother to Jasper, her face troubled. "We like it here, Mama," she said softly, "with Mr. Hale." Martha's expression was complicated. She glanced back at Arthur, who was fuming, then at Sheriff Brody, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. She looked at her daughters, seeing the resilience they had found here, the sense of peace they seemed to possess in this simple place after their ordeal. And she looked at Jasper Hale, the stranger who had risked his life for them, who had opened his solitary home and his guarded heart. "Arthur described you as penniless," Martha said to Jasper, her tone not judgmental, but contemplative. And my children are accustomed to comfort, to a different sort of life. I have little money, ma'am, Jasper admitted, meeting her gaze squarely. My ranch is small, my life is hard. But I pulled your daughters from that river. I kept them warm and fed and safe. And I grew to care for them. He looked at the children again, his voice thickening with emotion. They brought life back into a place that had only death. Martha Prescott looked at her brother, whose face was a mask of disapproval and impatience. She looked at the dusty, simple ranch. She looked at Jasper Hale, whose eyes held a depth of sorrow she recognized, tempered now by a fragile new hope that centered entirely on her children. She saw her daughters' faces, no longer just pale and frightened, but showing traces of the quiet joy they had found here. She knew the life Arthur wanted for them, the glittering, hollow world of society, of expectations and appearances. She had lived it since her husband's death, feeling increasingly suffocated by its constraints, its lack of genuine human connection. The accident, the loss of the nursemaid, the terror of losing her children had shaken her to her core. Finding them safe here with this quiet, seemingly insignificant man felt like a miracle. "Sheriff Brody," Martha said, her voice gaining strength, her eyes still on Jasper. "My brother brought you here to ensure the law was followed, and by the law, yes, my children belong with me." She paused, a slow, thoughtful smile touching her lips. "But perhaps what is right is not always what is easiest, or what society expects." Arthur stared at her, aghast. "Martha, what are you saying? You can't possibly be considering." "I am considering," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Considering what is best for my daughters, what has already proven best for them." She turned back to Jasper. "Mr. Hale, you saved my daughters. You gave them refuge when they had none. You gave them kindness. It seems they have found a home here, a true home." Jasper felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling he hadn't known was possible. Hope, tentative, fragile, but real. Martha Prescott looked at the two small figures clutching her hands, then back at Jasper, then at the simple cabin that suddenly seemed less like a hovel and more like a sanctuary. She made her choice, not with fanfare or drama, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who had seen what truly mattered. "Arthur," she said, her voice steady and final, "the children will be staying here, with Mr. Hale, for now." Arthur Prescott looked as if he might have a stroke. "Staying? Martha, you are being absurd. With him? In this wilderness? Think of their upbringing, their future, the family name." "I am thinking of my children," Martha replied, her eyes flashing with a steel Jasper hadn't expected. "Their well-being, their happiness, and I believe they have found something here with Mr. Hale that all the wealth and privilege in the world cannot provide." She turned back to Sheriff Brody. "Sheriff, I can assure you this is my decision. I am their mother, and I deem this arrangement to be in their best interest. I will be staying as well for the time being, to ensure their welfare. And perhaps," she looked at Jasper, a flicker of something else in her eyes, something akin to curiosity, or perhaps recognition of a kindred solitude, "to see what kind of home this truly is." Sheriff Brody, caught completely off guard, simply nodded slowly. He'd seen stranger things, but not many. "Well, ma'am," he said, scratching his head, "if that's your wish, as their mother." He cast a wary glance at Arthur Prescott. "The law supports your decision." Arthur Prescott sputtered, red-faced, unable to comprehend his sister's defiance of everything he represented. "This is madness, Martha, absolute madness. Father would be appalled. I will not stand for this. I will pursue this further. I will." "You will do nothing, Arthur," Martha said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through his blustering. "You will leave, now, and you will inform the family that the children are safe, and they are where they need to be." Defeated but still radiating indignation, Arthur Prescott sputtered a few more threats and climbed back into his carriage, urging the driver to turn around. He shot one last look of pure loathing at Jasper Hale before disappearing back down the track in a cloud of dust. Sheriff Brody, looking relieved to be out of the middle of it, tipped his hat to Martha and Jasper. "Afternoon, ma'am, Mr. Hale." He rode off, leaving the three of them standing in the quiet yard, the silence now filled with possibility, not emptiness. Martha Prescott, the railroad royalty, stood on the dusty ground of Jasper Hale's struggling ranch, her elegant dress out of place, her daughters holding her hands, looking up at Jasper with trusting eyes. "It seems," Martha said, a small, genuine smile returning to her face, "I owe you more than I can say, Mr. Hale." "Jasper," he corrected her, his voice a little shaky. "My name is Jasper." "Jasper," she repeated, the name sounding unfamiliar but not unwelcome on her tongue. She looked around the ranch, at the simple cabin, the vast, quiet land. It was a world away from the gilded cages of her life. It was real, and her children were happy here. Life on the ranch did not suddenly become easy. Martha Prescott had wealth, but little practical knowledge of frontier living. Jasper had the knowledge, but little else. The combination was awkward, challenging, and sometimes unexpectedly full of quiet joys. Martha learned to milk a cow, her initial squeamishness giving way to determination. Jasper learned that a woman's presence, especially a mother's, could fill a home in ways he hadn't realized were missing until they were returned. Abigail and Rose thrived. Their fear receded, replaced by the natural curiosity and laughter of childhood. They helped Jasper with chores in their small ways, their chatter a constant, welcome sound. They clung to Martha, reveling in her rediscovered presence, but they also sought out Jasper, following him around, sharing their discoveries, bringing him drawings scratched onto scraps of paper. Martha and Jasper navigated their strange, unconventional cohabitation with a quiet respect. They were from different worlds, their experiences vastly different, but they shared a fierce love for the two little girls who had brought them together. They talked, slowly at first, then more openly, sharing glimpses of their pasts, the losses they had endured. Martha spoke of the pressures of her world, the superficiality, the grief of losing her husband and feeling adrift. Jasper spoke of his own losses, the silence that had become his life. They found unexpected understanding in each other, a recognition of shared sorrow and a mutual desire for something more meaningful. The people in Redemption talked, of course. The wealthy widow from the East, living on the poor widower's ranch with her children, it was scandalous. But Martha, perhaps freed by her own recent brush with tragedy and her brother's stifling expectations, found she cared less and less about what society thought. Jasper, long accustomed to being outside the town's social circle, found strength in his newfound purpose and the quiet family they were building. Arthur Prescott continued to send indignant letters, threatening legal action, but Martha held firm. She used her influence not to return to her old life, but to protect the one she was building. She made it clear that her children were safe, happy, and where she wanted them to be. Slowly, the threats faded, replaced by a resentful silence from that corner of her world. As the seasons turned, the fragile thread of connection between Martha and Jasper deepened into something stronger, warmer. It wasn't the fiery passion of youth, but a quiet, steady affection, born of shared challenges, mutual respect, and a profound love for the children who had become the center of their lives. One evening, sitting by the fire after the children were asleep, Martha reached out and covered Jasper's hand with hers. His calloused hand, the one that had pulled her daughters from the river. "Thank you, Jasper," she whispered, "for everything. You didn't just save my daughters, you saved me too." He turned his hand, his fingers closing gently around hers. "You brought them here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You brought life back." The ranch, once a place of silent grief and isolation, became a home, filled with the sounds of laughter, the warmth of shared meals, the quiet comfort of shared presence. It was unconventional, unexpected, a family forged not by blood or societal expectation, but by a storm, a rescue, and the courage to build something new from the wreckage of the past. Jasper Hale, the penniless widower, had saved 2 screaming children from a river, and in doing so, had found his own unexpected redemption, a future he never could have imagined, built on the sturdy, unpredictable foundation of human connection and the quiet miracle of a life reborn.